In my language learning journey, I've seen things you wouldn't believe. I'm not talking about the time I jumped from a moving train in China, ill-advised, do not recommend, and I'm not talking about dining next to mafiosi in Rome. No, because you asked for it, I'm talking today about the years that I worked for Rosetta Stone, mostly in Grand Central Terminal, in the beating heart of Manhattan. Don't worry, Rosetta Stone corporate offices, this is more about Grand Central than it is about you. I still love you. But I will be spilling a little bit of Rosetta Stone tea. Before I say anything, I'll give you some background and address the burning question that's on everybody's mind. I worked for Rosetta Stone from just before the 2008 financial collapse to when I applied for grad school, so 4 or 5 years, almost entirely at a kiosk in the Gray Bar Passage in Grand Central. It's a large, mildly radioactive granite hallway. More on the radioactive part later. Before I share my stories, though, I'll go ahead and answer the question I know you all have. Does Rosetta Stone work? The honest answer, now that I no longer work for them and I'm on the other end of a PhD in linguistics, is sure. It really depends on what language you pick, what your motivation is, what your starting point is, what else you're doing. But the bottom line is that it does provide native speaker audio paired with fairly memorable, if culturally inappropriate, visual mnemonics, and they cover a decent amount of basic to intermediate vocabulary and grammatical structures with spaced repetition. I'll do a full review later, but I've used it, basically everyone I know has used it, we've all seen varying degrees of success. But that's not what I want to talk to you about. I want to tell you about criminals, celebrities, unsanctioned experiments on mob behavior, antebellum ballgown guy, and one man I'm dead certain was a time traveler. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones, and this is story time, I guess. This is Language Jones. I have so many stories I genuinely don't know where to start. I'm going to at least cover embarrassing myself in front of Wallace Shawn, the obscene breakfast wish, general bad behavior in Grand Central, concussions, the subway swearer, music under New York, the Dutch connection, and the time traveler. Real 12 monkeys situation, that one. The background that you need to know is that I worked at a kiosk in a hallway, sometimes alone and sometimes with others, sometimes 3 hours and sometimes a 15-hour day, and I saw literally everything that goes on in Grand Central because I was paying attention. I occasionally worked at the Time Warner Center, where the super rich would just throw their black Amexes at you, and I did a brief stint in Times Square. I got the job as a day job to support my fledgling jazz career, ill-advised, do not recommend, and I loved that I was encouraged to use the product as a way to catch people's attention. I basically got paid to study languages all day, and of course, do software retail sales. The overwhelming majority of customers were interesting, kind people who were on a personal language journey. Some came back months or years later and updated us on their exploits. It was great. Anyway, first things first. Everyone who's worked that job knows that all day, people walk up to you and blurt out, hello, in whatever other language they can think of. And at least 5 times a day, someone would walk up to me and say some variation of, I don't need this, I already speak French fluently. If you replied with, Félicitations, vous avez passé beaucoup de temps en France, they would then just look stricken and run away. People would also volunteer xenophobic and racist material all day. I was studying Persian one day when a woman told me that Arabic, I assume she thought I was studying Arabic, is a, quote, demonic squiggly snake language. Studying Japanese, people are going to say sayonara. Chinese, sayonara. Korean, sayonara. You also see a lot of people, especially in Grand Central, and you don't always remember where you saw them. So one day I see someone walk up, and I assumed I recognized him from the usual, say I'll be back to talk to you later during the morning commute and come by during the evening commute. He asked if it really worked, since he was interested in a gift for a friend, and I told him for it not to work would be inconceivable. Then I realized where I knew him from. I hadn't seen him in person. I'd seen him in The Princess Bride, and I'd inadvertently quoted it back at him. Brains are weird. Also, I saw Al Franken pre-scandal, and I was once told, "Hey asshole, watch where you're going," by Louis Black while on a lunch break. He walked into me. Celebrities. They're just like us. It wasn't all celebrities, though. There were a lot of unwell people in Grand Central, and more than once I'd be waiting to close up at 8 or 9 p.m., and someone would decide that now the empty Gray Bar Passage was the perfect place to seek satisfaction through self-gratification, and that I was basically equivalent to furniture. There were more than a few knife-wielding maniacs. I saw a guy take an entire can of pepper spray to the face and keep fighting cops until he heard the big cop, who just showed up, expand his baton, shung, 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 at which point he quietly lay down and put his hands behind him. I also saw more than one person poop in protest while getting arrested. People just do that, I guess. There was a sort of Usenet forum situation that many of us were on, connecting kiosk monkeys across the country. I didn't make up the term, by the way. There was a whole jargon on there. Most employees weren't on it, but there was basically one at every kiosk who I assume went on to be terminally online on Twitter and Tumblr and whatever else. You need to know this so I can tell you how a weird experience I had became the standard kiosk monkey greeting. One day a guy walks up to me, leans in a little too close, and declares, "Breakfast to you, motherfucker." I'm like, "What?" And he elaborates, "Breakfast to everyone." It was such a kind sentiment expressed so angrily. It became sort of an inside joke greeting. Oh, and also a lot of the jargon was Dutch. So I took up Dutch on a whim one day to play a prank on my parents' neighbor. That part's not important. And I was blown away by how many words are cognate with English, and also the funniest possible cognate. You lope and prattle and sit on a stool. The boy's a young'un, and if he wakes up, de jonge fucker. At one point, there were like 20 of us learning Dutch, and we had a sort of online thieves' cant, so breakfast to everybody was just as frequently ontbijt naar iedereen. Let's see. I had a guy come up and ask me where the subway was. I told him down the hall, take a left, and it's at the end of the hall. 30 minutes later, he came back and yelled at me, "I meant sandwiches, asshole." Sometimes I get bored and do experiments on crowd behavior. The gray bar has 2 rows of 10 doors, and I observe that people will always avoid opening a door if there's an open door that they can go through instead. So I'd open different combinations of doors and see what happens. If you were a commuter between 2008 and 2012 and you were in a gray bar collision, sorry. And you may be entitled to compensation from a class section. I'm just kidding. It's your own fault. If you open one door at the far end and the other at the other far end, it is absolute bedlam. I'd also see people fall down and get concussions. Not because of the door thing, but because the granite hallway is slippery sometimes. It turns out that concussed people get single-minded focus on their tasks, and I can't tell you how many commuters I saw, bleeding from a head wound, try to fight off EMTs or cops so they could catch the 517 train to wherever. Which is bad news, because if they make it and then fall asleep on the train, that's not good. Ill-advised. Do not recommend. If you've ever heard a street musician in the subway in NYC and loved it, I'm here to tell you right now that whatever song they were playing is the only song that they know. None of them knew more than 3, max. And they would have a permit to play in the same location for 4 hours. And they might set up in the same location to busk 4 days a week. There are people out there I desperately loathe, and songs that have become completely ruined for me. You only hear it for a minute as you're walking by. I have to hear that guy sing "My Girl" for 4 straight excruciating hours. Speaking of things you're only exposed to for a minute in passing, but that I was exposed to for an 8-hour shift, 5 days a week, Grand Central is, and I quote from an article on it, more radioactive than a power plant. Not just that, but again, I quote, "It's worth noting that if Grand Central Station were a nuclear power plant, it would be shut down for exceeding the maximum allowable annual dose of radiation for employees." Perhaps that's why the time traveler ended up there. There was an evening that I was working, and a man came up to me and demanded to know what year it was. He was in black combat boots, black cargo pants, black undershirt, black plate carrier, and a black cap. When I told him the year, he said, "Damn, I overshot," which is a weird response to an already weird question. And then he asked me if East Alemania was still at war with the Germanic Confederation. I was like, "I don't know what those are." And he was like, "Right, of course not, never mind," which was very unsettling. Then he asked me where he could find a National Geographic magazine, which was evidently what he thought he was getting when he walked up to the kiosk in the first place. We talked for like a half hour, and while I don't remember most of the details, I am 100% convinced that time travel exists, but only by side-slipping through parallel offset universes like in Sliders. Let's see, a few more things. Every Saturday when Grand Central was completely empty, a man would walk through in a huge hoop-skirt antebellum ball gown. No hair and makeup, no nails, and more often than not, just tennis shoes, but sometimes with a parasol. I'm 100% certain I saw him in a business suit on weekdays too, but different ball gown every week. I admired his, doing his own thing. An actor colleague of mine would do accents for entire shifts and convince people he was from other places. Oh, and when I applied to grad school, I cold emailed the CEO, and he actually wrote me a letter of recommendation. I'm not sure if that helped me, but it was a great note to go out on. To end this video, I'm going to go back to whether or not Rosetta Stone works. I have a bunch of friends who use Rosetta Stone consistently, with other things too, of course, to study various languages for 3 or 6 months and then travel and use their languages to surprise people. An extreme example is my wife doing the 12-day challenge, something kiosk employees just made up, where you do 4 core lessons a day for 12 days and cover the whole course. And she was able to converse in Dutch with a monolingual Dutch speaker for an entire evening. The short-term nature of that experiment was such that she now speaks basically no Dutch. Anyway, I'll be back with more linguistics content in a week or two. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, please like and subscribe. I have a Patreon link below. And until next time, breakfast to everyone.